Hey folks, Bernie here. So if you're an independent co-working space owner or community manager, come to Unreasonable Connection. There'll be a link in the show notes to this. It is a 1 hour online, no pictures, no panels, just small online rooms with real people like you who run co-working spaces. We talk honestly about what's going on. It's not recorded. There's no sponsors. There's no product placement. And together you will figure it out with the other 3 or 4 people in your room. It's informal but structured, so you actually meet people and not just share a screen. I would say it's the anecdote to awkward networking. In fact, it's the networking event for people that don't like networking. And you can click the link in the show notes. It's online, it's free, and hope to see you there. Now, on with the show. Hello folks, and welcome to today's Co-working Values podcast. And there's me and my friend Tilley. Say hello, Tilley.
Hello.
Hello. We're going to be interviewing Helena today. So Helena, what are you known for and what would you like to be known for?
Well, I am known as a pioneer of a worldwide localization movement. In other words, I've been promoting something I call localization on every continent for almost 50 years.
And that's a long time to be. And is that what you'd like to be known for? Is there something else that's emerged in the last 50 years that has changed your vision, meaning and purpose in the world? Or are you still on that track?
I am still on that track, and that's why my organization is called Local Futures.
So we're going to, obviously, folks, we're talking about co-working today, and there's a whole Local Futures universe, and we're going to put a link to the website, as always, in the show notes. So when we think about co-working spaces, Helena, if imagine I'm running a small co-working space in London, how can I be more local? How can I stop buying stuff from big multinational global people and make this change? Because it sounds a lot of these things sound great, but they're quite hard to do. It's quite hard to stop using Amazon, even though you hate it.
Yeah, well, that's why we, first of all, always urge people to try to find a few partners to create a little group. It might be just 1 or 2 other people, but ideally sort of 20. And a co-working space could be a perfect place to do that, to perhaps suggest that they look at one of our films. One of them that gives an overview is called The Economics of Happiness. And they'll see that we need to have a better understanding of the global to really understand why local is so important and such a win-win-win direction to move in. But we'll also see that it's really important that we do change the I to a we. We've been trapped over the last particularly 35 years, a corporate world where essentially governments have signed over their rights to global corporations, and they are allowing them to run the world and to run our media, to run virtually every avenue of knowledge is dominated by big money. So when I started this work, almost all environmentalists, and I was active throughout Europe, North America, and in other countries, we realized that we needed policy change because we were aware that the whole economy had become too centralized, and that was hugely damaging environmentally and socially. We also had profound voices like Rachel Carson, a scientist in America, who was pointing out that science had become too narrow and we needed to shift towards much more holistic, interdisciplinary knowledge. So these 2 strong messages really shaped the environmental movement. And then we were talking about, getting enough of a lobby and enough voices so that we could change government policy towards what was needed at the level of university research, development of R&D, and especially what was needed to heal the environment and heal our relationship with the environment. But then what happened is that in the mid to late 80s, governments started signing on to trade treaties. And this was a new form of global that had existed before and was equally damaging before, but now it took on a much more active, gave global corporations much more power because they were using centralized technologies to get their message out. And now suddenly, from that time on, we were all consumers, no longer citizens. We were now going to be, as individual consumers, we were going to change the world by buying the right products. And then by the 90s, we were told that if we cared about the environment, well, then we shouldn't drive our car and we shouldn't get into an airplane. And then we were told a few years later, you are so greedy, you don't care, you are destroying the world. And here we are today with a lot of people very depressed and very overwhelmed. So, what I would love to urge people to do is to take a deep breath and be willing to step back a bit and just look at that bigger picture. And it becomes so clear that most people do not want this crazy consumer culture. It is not coming from them. We are not driving the system, but we've allowed, through blindness and lack of understanding, particularly of economics generally, but particularly the global economy, which has been this sort of invisible empire. And because of that, we are now facing such enormous problems and all the time. As we know, and I hope people have seen the film, The Social Dilemma, so they're aware that we are, if we don't wake up and have a strong voice and come together more collectively to change things, we are being driven by an army of algorithms, as the film Social Dilemma showed, that thrives on polarization, hatred, division. You know, in my 50 years working as an activist, it's only in the last, what is it now, 4, 5, 6 years that I've seen such intense polarization. And we're victims. We're victims of a system that's driving this, and it's directly linked to a type of extractive global capitalism that is a very different animal from what we might all embrace, which would be more localized systems where we wouldn't need a centralized, top heavy, ideologically based government. We wouldn't need socialism, Marxism, or the type of capitalism we have now, but we would be trading. Some people would work harder, they would have more wealth, but it would all be on a scale where we see what we do and where the community and the social fabric around us is aware of what's happening. We are now, I would say, the main problem really is blindness to what's actually going on. And that's why I feel very motivated, and I'm happy to be on this podcast, because I feel that seeing that bigger picture and the basic principles of it, which, by the way, does not need to entail any anger or finger pointing or assuming that every CEO of every global corporation is some kind of psychopath. Unfortunately, I do see a lot of people assuming that, which is also understandable. I have compassion and understanding for them as well. But the truth is that from the grassroots to the very, tops of BlackRock and Goldman Sachs and so on, we are being driven by a blind system that we support when we remain blind to it. So, what to do? Get together in a group, look at that picture. And one of the things that will become obvious is that part of the healing that we need to undergo to calm our nervous systems, to become more compassionate, is also to reconnect with other people. We've been driven in a direction of isolation, competition, speed, and we're feeling desperately lonely. So just having a group to talk in a deeper, more honest, heartfelt way about our problems, and to realize that we can be loved even if we're not perfect. That's one of the steps on a path of deeper systemic localization. And that's accompanied by an understanding of what we might do to bring about systemic change. But I better stop there and let you say something because it's a very
That
long
was
answer.
you just we can stop now. You just answered all my questions in one go. As you were saying that, and I was like enthralled, but the maybe it's just me and the little algorithm I'm in, but I think I just feel there's more. You said about polarization, and there's that in the last 5 years, I've never experienced more polarization in my short time on this world. But I do feel there's things like you said about consumers and citizens, and that reminds us of John Alexander's stuff, and he's come to do podcasts and events with us in London, and I've got more hope than I ever have done, even though there is definitely more of a shitstorm than there ever has been in my life. And is that how, Tilley, is that how you feel? Or is it just because I'm trapped in my own little echo chamber?
No, I agree, and I think what Helena said at the end there was the most moving for me, because I think that constant reminder that those softer aspects of life have also been so eroded just internally in each of us, that needing groups to remember those things that we often, especially in the UK, shy away from talking about. We need to make much more of an effort to create space and time to address the emotional effects that all of this has been having on us for some time, because that then is like a vicious circle of feeding the isolation and the polarization.
Yeah, I'm glad you do see that, Tilly. And of course, this is also very different from what has also been happening over these years that I've been active, which is there's been an awakening to the need for a more spiritual, holistic worldview, and a lot of interest in Eastern religions, Buddhism, but yoga, and generally a lot of emphasis on the need for a spiritual, holistic worldview rather than the mechanistic one. But what I've seen is that has led to people thinking it's all about starting on the inside, and once I have inner peace, then I'll think about the outer. So the difference is what we're saying in local futures is to be aware of the absolute inextricable connection between the outer and the inner, between the material and the energetic, and the understanding that and realizing we need to work on both ends is fundamental, I think, to a real awakening of what's gone so wrong. And that also involves understanding that a deep connection to nature is fundamental. And I have many colleagues, indigenous people and others, who are reminding us of our separation from nature. And there are beautiful, very important projects helping to bring us back into a deeper connection with the living world. But from my point of view, what I learned in the indigenous culture that I spoke the language of and lived with is that the human connection is even more fundamental. It's an absolute need. Every child, of course, needs it, even to survive, but the love and the care that we need to allow ourselves to come back to requires time. And we need, as you said, Tilly, to give ourselves the space and time to explore this is really important. And I'm saying that at the same time as I would like people to feel a sense of urgency, but ensure that they do not now spend only their time focusing on the urgency of bringing change to the biggest system, that they realize that the small changes at the local level, at the community level, and at their inner personal level are also vital. So we need to be both slowing down and speeding up. And that might sound impossible, but it isn't. We can actually choose to inhabit part of our day, or it might be the week, or it might sometimes be that, for many months you're sort of in a left brain speedy modality as you try to make a film or do something to get a bigger picture out. But then you make sure that you allow yourself the time and the deep breathing and the slowing down that your whole body needs, but also, again, in your interactions with others, allowing for that deeper, slower, more vulnerable, more real, more human communication.
That's beautiful. And I think there's something that stands out in what you're saying to me, and all your work actually, Helena, is being able to be two things at once. And almost that's the kind of like big invitation at the moment. So seeing yourself as local and recognizing what is happening globally, and knowing how those two things interact with each other. And as you said, being fast and slow at the same time. And I think this is where we need to really be aware that we're having to be in different realities all at one time. And I wondered if you have anything to say on that. And the other question I had for you was around capital, and whether we can start to really pay attention to the different types of capital that we have access to, that so we stop being obsessed with the financial capital. Because I know with like localization projects in the past, we've had things like local pounds and local currencies, which have in some ways just replicated the model that has got us into trouble in the first place. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on like those, that nature capital and the social capital, and is localism needing to really identify those different types of capital?
Well, I worry about too much idealism. And what I've seen, what can work, is actually using the national currency of different places, but using that to start rebuilding the structures of more localized economies. Now, for us, I won't go on about this too long, but I do want to say very loudly and clearly that the most promising changes I see around the world have to do with rebuilding local food economies. And this is because we need to really step back to understand that the only thing human beings produce that everybody needs every day, usually 3 times a day, is food. And tragically, since enclosures and slavery, we've been trapped into a system where our elites started pushing us in the direction of becoming dependent on trade, even for that basic everyday need. So making shifts to that is, I'm just amazed at how these initiatives around the world of starting new farmers markets, of co-ops, and a real cooperation between the growers and the people who are going to be eating the food, helping to create better infrastructure, like here in Devon, where I am right now. They've been able to, through grassroots, basically sweat and tears and philanthropy, been able to establish a new mill so that the wheat from the farm right here is being put into bread in the nearby bakery, which is, so an emerging local food economy. These things are happening around the world, and the capital they need is volunteerism and philanthropy. And the philanthropy could even be, people who can't themselves afford to only buy local food because it can be more expensive, but they might be willing to put a couple of dollars towards supporting a local food initiative. Or they might be willing to donate a couple of hours a week. And by the way, what I'm seeing in the community gardens and in the local food world is that this volunteering on the land and connecting in community over seed and soil is one of the most healing, psychological treatments that I know of. And I know of prisoners, I know of torture victims, depressed people, addicted people who have benefited from that. So I do recommend it as something that everyone might want to try out. And that's even if you live in the big city, there may well be possibilities within the city or near wherever you live. And then generally, in terms of capital, I would watch out for very ambitious schemes like blockchain and some idea of building trust with people you've never met, you've never seen, and technologies that we don't understand. We don't understand the enormous energy use, the water use. It turns out that just using the national currency right now and starting the process of rebuilding that closeness. So, in the co-working spaces, that's also beginning to happen. And I hope there that people will be supporting those that are less commercial, less top down, and more bottom up. I love examples like a group in Vermont that wanted to have a space in the town for general localization efforts, which also include repair cafes, and they also include so often swapping things, including tools, but it can be baby clothes, it can be all kinds of things that you need, that are real needs in the community. And the owner of that space offered to reduce the rent for a local community initiative. And a few months later, the owner came back and said, I want to give it to you for free. I love what you're doing. And so those actually brings tears to my eyes. But these kinds of things are happening. People want to be supportive. We innately want to be loved and appreciated and heard. And we actually want to love and care as well. That's a true human universal need.
Beautiful. There's all that food thing. I live here in Vigo in Galicia, and when you go to the supermarket, it's still a supermarket and it's still a chain of supermarkets, but so much of what you pick up off the shelf is made here in Galicia, and that little thing gives me so much joy. And when you go when you go to the supermarket, there's like two different types of sliced bread, whereas you go to the supermarket where I used to live in London, and there's like 47 different types of sliced bread and all the packaging and all that stuff. And when you buy, most people buy bread from the local bakers here, and they're everywhere. And that bread, you don't feel bloated and ill after eating it because it's just made with ingredients, not like paint stripper and whatever else they put into bread nowadays. I just had to shout that out loud. It's really enjoyable eating food grown, made where you are. One thing before we go, Helena, is you said about we need to be wary of ideals, and that I've so many times in the past I've gone, oh, we can do this, and it's the amount of effort to try and get that project. I've either been part of it or seen other people do it, and it seems like they spend 5 years trying to get something going, and then it doesn't quite work. And I was really interested the way you say if we just use the money we have. And could you say a little bit about watching out for ideals? Because it seems like there's a lot of shiny new things around, and we should just stick with, it's almost like stick with the devil we know. Is that the right way of interpreting it?
Well, I mean, in the long run, we definitely want to be looking at changing currencies. Particularly, we need to hold on to our national currencies for right now, because they are very much threatened by pressure to go digital and global. And unfortunately, as part of this global trading system, our governments are supporting that. So we need to be very aware of that and try to hold on to cash wherever possible. And in the long run, I would hope for even greater decentralization. But it is about being more pragmatic. And we are also being pressured, actually, again, by very clever think tanks to only opt for the perfect. So we're also being told that we need to have a perfectly democratic structure. We need to have representation from every culture and every group. Otherwise, we're being elitist. This is what people in the environmental, social, activist movements are being pressured to do, when in fact, most of that pressure does not apply at the global level. In fact, it's the exact opposite. So we have to be, again, a bit more savvy and a bit more aware. And if we do learn in a deep way from indigenous cultures, not just about some rituals and some coming of age or some plant medicines, but really, how did they live? Then, in fact, I should recommend my book, Ancient Futures, because I lived with people and I realized that in these totally vital areas of how we rear our children and how we rear our food, there are so many lessons from these smaller scale, ecologically founded, and communities based on deep interdependence between the oldest and the youngest. Now, this is something we can't bring back overnight, but I love projects that do, even in our crazy, speedy, modern industrialized world, try to consciously reestablish connection between the oldest and the youngest. And there are ways that that can be done in ways that can be practical and economic, save time, and have profound psychological and spiritual benefits. So I do hope people will read my book, Ancient Futures, and come to our website. We've got a localisation action guide, which will give you a whole range of different projects, also in different fields, like in education, in energy, and so forth. So I hope you look at that.
Thank you so much, Helena. I feel so grounded every time I hear you speak, and just, yeah, an absolute pleasure to have been able to capture more of your words on this topic. I know there's so much more we can talk about, but thank you for spending some of your Friday with us today. And I
Yeah,
hope this conversation continues.
absolutely. I'm really looking forward to seeing you again, Tilley. And I do I can offer an extremely grounded picture and very global. And I think that's the key. And that's rather rare, because most of the people who are offering a global view are coming from a world where they were only seeing the world from above. They were not on the ground with farmers, living with indigenous people, and the assumptions they have been part of are really extremely only able to impose monoculture, biological monoculture, human monoculture, and that's deadly. So it's a really urgent time now for us to wake up, and the path forward is so clear, and it really is right under our feet. It's right next door. There's so much that we can do right where we are, but we need to have a much better understanding of the global situation.
Thanks very much, Helena. There is so much we can do. I really agree with that. And thank you, Tilley, for introducing Helena to us today. And folks, if you go to our lovely, beautiful show notes, we'll link to Helena's books, and you can how to get in contact with Local Futures and take part and follow them, and also how to connect with Tilley. A lot of you would have met her at our London Coworking Assembly events, and there's a link to the LinkedIn group there, a link to the Workspace Design Show, which is next February in London, and I'm sure there's something else. An Unreasonable Connection, which is our monthly hour-long, very, very informal connection event. So wherever you are in the world today, be careful out there. It is a jungle.